Good morning and welcome to a very special episode of Super Mania. Why is this episode special? Well, on this show, we discuss all things neurodiverse and mental health. And today, because it's Valentine's Day, we're going to be specifically discussing what it's like to love someone with neurodiversity, all the wonderful adventures that come along with that. And I cannot think of anyone better to share this episode with than Miss Kat Alexander. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Good
How are
morning.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. And happy Valentine's Day to all the listeners out there that celebrate.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah. I don't like this. I've never been big on this holiday. I just am kind of not. But I know a lot of people are. So we're gonna celebrate all things love today.
Right.
So I mean, I eat, live, and breathe in this neurodiversity space, but tell our audience a little bit more about you and what brings you to talk about this wonderful subject of love with us today.
Oh my gosh. It's all your fault. I blame you.
I did it. I fully.
You did it. You did it. You did it. It's the place that I live these days because it's near and dear to my heart. I have a lifetime of lived experience being neurodivergent and with I'm ADHD and I'm dyslexic. Um, and maybe a couple other things. I'll know soon. We can tell you more about that later. But but yeah, I have been an extreme version of ADHD my entire life, and all kinds of fun things happen as a result of that. Some great and some not so good. Um, and uh, and the same with my dyslexia. It makes learning challenging. It makes work challenging, but at the same time, it makes me extremely good at some things that other people um, aren't necessarily.
Right. It's your superpowers.
Right.
It can be
Yeah.
challenging, but then we get superpowers too. So it's kind of
Yep.
cool. It balances
Yep.
out.
And I
And
and
for
I've had
anybody,
the interesting experience of raising four amazing kids, and three of them are neurodivergent. So it's a family affair. It's not just me. Absolutely a family affair.
I grew up with that on especially my cousins and things like that. We they do. I married into neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And my husband has different neurodiversities than me. I have multiple. The two that I talk about the most are obsessive compulsive disorder. And I want to be real clear because I hear a lot of people, oh, I'm so OCD because I do this and this. No, 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 no. I have to have even bites of food. I have to like do things even numbers of times. It's a very specific thing. It's not like, oh, I'm so OCD because I like to have organization. No.
Right.
This is
Well, it's
very specific.
interesting because you hear so much that opposites attract. And what a day to be talking about this, right? Valentine's
Right.
Day. But you hear so much about how opposites attract, but I think like finds like, right?
Yes. Also that. Yes.
Absolutely, like magnets.
Very
We
true.
just come together. We know our
Yeah.
people when we see them and we
It's
gravitate to
true.
them. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. So I have that, and I also have bipolar disorder, and yes, mental health disorders or I don't like the word disorder actually. Mental health diagnoses can be neurodiversities as well because it can change how you process information. And I have bipolar one, which sends me on extreme highs and extreme lows, and that does change how my mind thinks and processes information. So that does kind of fit into that category as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
same for
so
me. I get what you're saying
yeah,
there because I process things differently when I'm having extreme anxiety. And for years, my therapist has said, I really feel like this is a physical anxiety disorder, and I'm highly opposed to medication unless it's a do or die kind of situation. And and what's interesting about that is that it turned out that with physical anxiety, there can be a mineral and vitamin deficiency.
yes,
So they
yes,
started me on B6 and B12 back in September, and for the first time in my entire life, I am anxiety free. And I've
yay.
noticed how different my thinking is. Don't get me wrong, I still have all the same ADHD and dyslexic challenges that I had before. They just aren't. clouded behind this shadow of, this big loud anxiety noise that was going on
Right.
all the time. So
Right.
now I get to see what they really look like. And
Yeah.
that's been a very interesting journey.
And
Like I
I'm
want to ride
glad.
roller coasters and climb mountains and do crazy stuff now because I don't have this
I'm so
anxiety
glad for
anymore.
you though. I'm so glad because it can feel so wonderful to just get to sit with the real you, not the stressed out you, and not
Yeah.
the overwhelmed you. And that's a really wonderful gift to have. And I do want to clarify a few things. So you might have heard both of us using different terminology. So while at one point neurodiverse and neurodivergent were kind of used separately, they've actually now merged and are basically synonymous with each other. So it's just preferred terminology. Everybody has their own, much like with many other diverse groups right now. So just so you know, what we're saying is the same thing. Because I've had some viewers get confused about that. What we were saying is the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I do want to say too that um, we will talk about our own preferences for treatment. That is not condoning or dismissing any other treatment options. So we're just going to talk about us, but medication can be wonderful for some people, not for others. Different forms of therapy are good for some people, not others. Everybody has a unique path. So, and talking about that. So I think this is a great way to launch into loving the subject of what it's like to love somebody with neurodiversity. So
Yeah.
it's always challenging, right? When someone functions differently than you. And I don't mean like, I mean, we all have different personalities, but when somebody actually functions differently than you, that can be very challenging. That can be very difficult. And it's very easy to say, you need to get medicated so that life's easier for me. Or you need to go to therapy because life's easier for me if you do that. But is that really the best thing for them? So let's talk about that first, because I know you and I both have some experience on this topic. So share, what do you think?
You just put it perfectly in terms of my upbringing. When I was a kid, ADHD wasn't even a term yet. Um, so, but luckily, my parents got connected with people who were starting to understand what they then called hyperactivity. And I think back then it's just a very different culture. So, so it was interesting that, my parents were running at anything that would help me fit in. And I think part of that was because they saw that I knew I was different than everybody else and not in a good way. And, um, recently I went through this neuropsych evaluation for ADHD and emotional intelligence and IQ. And it was no surprise when they came back and they said, yeah, your ADHD combined severe. They had to throw the word severe on the end, right? But if you can imagine, I've had a lifetime of learning some really great compensatory skills that I clearly did not have when I was a kid. So, not fitting into this, most kids' ability to be told, okay, and if you sit still for the next 30 minutes and we're going to do this thing, right? Whether it's in class or at home or whatever. And then there's me. And I'm just all over the place. Um, I think my parents were desperate not only to find a way to be able, I mean, frankly, there's no better way of putting it because, and it's not a knock on them, but to kind of help them manage me better because they had a whole life going on here with two other kids besides me and, jobs and careers and all this stuff.
Well,
And,
there was no information. Like
there was no
there
information
was no
and
self-education at this point at all.
right. And, and I was a lot. I mean, the fact of the matter is I was a lot and I knew I was a lot.
You're like, I was
And
super extra. I was
I
so
was super extra. And and in some ways I think that kind of made me someone who when I walked in the room I kind of lit it up in a good way. My cousins today who, they love to tell stories about when I was a kid and, I came up with all these creative, fun games to play, like the laundry chute at my grandfather's house, and I dropped stuff down the laundry chute to them in the basement. Right?
That's a great game.
I was
See,
the
that's
only
what
one ever getting in trouble, but I was the one inventing all the fun stuff to do, right?
I think it's fascinating because the way that we see things manifest in children, because it, I think in a way it's easier for adults to process neurodiversity with children because it's, oh, they're so creative, or look how energetic they are, and it's kind of more
Yeah.
socially acceptable at that
Right.
age. And not 100%. I don't want to take away from the fact that what people like Jason was talking about with his son, how teachers can sometimes behave, the educational system in general. And I want to say too, so I've seen, so Jason dropped a comment, I'm going to put it back up here, about a teacher that kept telling them that they need to put their son on medication. First of all, a teacher is not a doctor, nor a mental health professional. That is not their job. That is not their level of expertise. You do not need to be listening to your teacher about how to treat your child. Where you should be listening to them, however, is for indicators of, hey, this is something that we're seeing. This is something we need to be aware of. Now,
Right.
it's a very
Something we
lazy
could go and take care of.
Yes. Yeah.
There are helpers to be sought for this,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And it's not that hard, by the way, to teach a child with ADHD. And I can speak from some experience on this because I've taught an ADHD child to read, which
Yeah.
that's an adventure.
Yes, it is. Because we don't
and-
read so well. We read so fast that we skip words, we skip phrases, we sometimes
yeah,
whole sentences.
he loved reading, but he would kind of more guess what things would say after a while because he
Yeah.
just didn't want to do it. But it was very cute. And the same thing with math, and I've taught a neurodiverse child math. I've taught and different things like that. So I have a little bit of experience here, not in a classroom setting, but I do have some experience here. And it's not that difficult. It's not. You just have to learn how that child functions and what they need.
Yeah.
And I'm
Well,
not going to do the whole thing about the educational system, but the main thing is don't listen to your teachers for
yeah.
what your child needs, please.
And with the teachers and especially with parents, because in the home it's a different environment, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the hard, there's that positive side of being a kid who's neurodivergent, and then there's the other side of it. And the other side of it is, first of all, your parents' capacity for the extra patience, at the very least, that it takes.
Yeah.
And it takes the term unconditional love to a whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
Because kids stress parents out anyway, just because by nature of being kids, right? But then you take a neurodivergent kid, especially one, I could speak from my own experience with my hyperactivity. That piece of it was so intense, but then the education piece of it and addressing that at home, I heard so much about, if you just sit still, if you just concentrate, if you cared enough to do the work, if you,
it's not
if you just be quiet and listen for a minute. And they felt like those were helpful things that if they could just teach me to do those things, then I'd be better, and then I'd feel better, and then I'd feel more successful.
But it doesn't.
And
it makes you it actually makes your brain malfunction when you're forced to behave in a way. And this is the thing a lot of parents don't realize. And so I don't fault them for this, but
they don't know. It's just a matter of not knowing.
But
you don't know what you don't know.
Right. You don't know what you don't know, but it is still a matter of, we need to evolve as a society so that people do know this.
Yes.
So when you ask somebody to function in a way that is not natural to their brain, it actually causes them stress and it causes unhealthy responses. This has been proven time and again. There are studies by Yale, Harvard, a bunch published in Psychology Today. It goes on and on and on. It is a proven fact. It stresses the brain out. Now, I'm not talking about teaching your kid to act right. I'm not talking about teaching them manners and asking them to behave in a way that is non-destructive. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about basic function of the brain. In other words, you can't tell a creative kid, don't be creative. Not going to work. You can't get a logical child and say, why can't you use your imagination?
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. And it's also interesting. I've seen some very fun things with parents that just fascinate me since I've gotten into this work. And one of the most interesting examples was a little girl who kept telling her, who we're fairly certain is on the spectrum, who kept telling her parent that certain shirts and shoes hurt. And she's a very little girl, pre-K, like little baby thing. And they say, but you wear the exact same pair of shoes in a different color, or the exact same shirt in a different color, or the same dress in a different color all the time. You're just being annoying. You're just being bad. You just don't want to do this. And I finally stopped them. I said, hold on. A lot of people on the spectrum have color preference, and it actually stresses them out to put these other colors or these other textures or whatever it is on their body. She doesn't have the vocabulary to say this color stresses me out.
Well, yeah, she can say this hurts my serenity.
Yeah, yeah. She's 3.
Damaging my serenity here.
Yeah, like she's 3. What do you want from her? Right. So what she's saying is it hurts because that she knows that it's stressful. That's her word for this.
Yep.
And so they started paying attention, and they realized that anything outside of blue or on the gray scale, meaning from black to white, anything outside of that, didn't want to touch it, didn't want to wear it, had no interest in it. But if it was on that spectrum, and some light purples, there were some light purples that were acceptable. Anything outside of that didn't want to wear it. But those things were fine. And she never put up a fuss.
And good on them for recognizing that too, because this is where self-esteem gets impacted. This is where rather than self-esteem being built up, it gets torn down.
And what a simple thing. And who cares what color she wants to wear? Like, who cares?
There's an outstanding book out there, and you may have actually read it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. And that's The Power of Different by Dr. Gail Saltz.
Oh, yes.
And she does a fabulous job of walking you through all the different ways that neurodivergence affects a person psychologically, how it forms their strengths, how and what they focus on, their strengths or their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. But this self-esteem thing, it's a big deal, because I always thought I was stupid, always, because I heard so much of the time, you're just not trying hard enough. You're not, you're smart, you can do the work, you just won't. But then there was the other conversation going on of just leave her alone. This is the best that she can do. Well,
which that's not literally, that's not any better.
My high school transcript, where the majority of my classes I was failing. And at the time, unfortunately, I was living in a culture where there wasn't anyone looking at that going, oh, wow, wait a minute, maybe something else is going on here.
Right. Yeah, that wasn't really.
We know and by the way, we know she's ADHD. We know in some minor way that she learns differently than others. Right. And that carried into my professional career. I was always, I can't believe I'm, on a LinkedIn live show admitting this to the LinkedIn population at large. But I will tell you, honestly, my greatest fear, even though I worked my way up to a director's level position in operations, and I know I'm good at it. I know I'm damn good at it, and extra good at it in some ways. I bring some extra value in some areas, right? But that being said, my greatest fear has always been that I was going to get found out, that they were going to find out that I was the square peg, I wasn't fitting into their round hole, and I was going to get fired. And that
I've seen it a lot.
Stayed with me as recently as not in the current. It's funny. I finally found a position, and maybe it took making an actual career transition and moving industries. But I work for a company today who is all as much about the person and how this person can lean into their greatest strengths and bring that to the table to benefit the company, as they are about
the functionality, the
productivity. The standardized expectations for productivity, if that makes sense.
I think no, it does, and it is, and I do want to say too, real quick before I dive into this, it's very easy to judge companies who function differently than that. But I do always remind people that some companies are not in a position to give as much grace just because of the sheer nature of what they do. Some things let's say you're at a hospital sorry, but patients need treatment when they need treatment. It's
And
not
that's
like,
a perfect example.
and
Yep,
so you
because
have
I've been
to,
in managed services for 30 years up until about a year and a half ago. And that's essential services. That's people that still had to go to work during COVID, that
yes,
still have to go to work
yes.
during the
And
flood,
that's different.
especially
So
during the flood and all those things. Yeah.
I like to give a lot of grace for that and to
Yes,
remind people that it's not always so simple. But I do want to hit on some
absolutely.
things that you said because we're talking about what it's like to love somebody with neurodiversity.
Yeah.
So number one is I'm hearing a lot of you need to make sure that at whatever your response is to them, that it's about building up their esteem and about making sure that they're heard as they are, that you're not constantly telling them how you are is wrong, how you are is not as good. And I don't want to sound like I'm bashing your parents because I'm not. There was a lot of
No, they did the
misinformation back
best
then,
they
a
could
lot of
with what
lack
they
of
had to work
a
with.
lot of lack of
Yes.
information. So I'm not bashing that, but it's time to correct it. It's time to realize this is not the thing. We need to do better. And so you need to remember when you're talking to somebody who processes information differently than you, that the way they're doing it is not wrong. It's different. It's also, I had a very interesting comment on my other show, Career Launch Live. I had one of my favorite clients on. His name is Javier Ortiz. He works with a company named Synchro. And he talked about at one point, and I actually don't remember if it was on or right after the show now that I'm saying this, but he talked about the importance of when you're, communicating to people and you're, letting them, say all these things, to not take it as an affront on your intelligence. So if somebody disagrees with you, if somebody thinks differently than you, they're not insulting you or how you think or what you're doing. They just have a different way to process information. If they want to do something differently than you want to do it, that's block that ego defense. That's when I talk a lot about ego defense nowadays. And it's a natural response, by the way. Your brain needs to be right. That's just part of your brain. Your brain needs to be right. But it's not always a helpful response. So it's very important. And I have a whole other class on this. If anybody watching wants to learn about this, just message me. It's very simple, actually, to learn to block your ego defense and respond with curiosity. So when someone is experiencing different than you, thinking differently than you, processing differently than you, instead of responding to defend your position, respond by saying something like, tell me more about that. And
Yes.
don't respond with aggression of, well, why do you think that? Ugh, that's a yucky way to say that. That makes me
Right.
feel like you don't want to hear what I have to say. Say something like, tell me more about this. Tell me, okay, that's interesting. I want to hear more about that. Something like that encourages
That's
them.
one of my favorite phrases. That's interesting. Let's
Yeah.
talk about it. Yeah.
I learned from my mother the importance of this wording because as a child, I was a horrible artist. I mentioned this on an episode recently with my sister. I couldn't draw for crud. And so I would always bring home these pictures. And my mother, instead of going, okay, now what is this? would look at me and say, oh, this is so beautiful. I love the colors. Tell me more about this. And then I
That's
would tell her
great.
what it was a picture of because she had no idea. So I learned that importance of giving the other person dignity, even when maybe what they're saying doesn't sound right, even if it sounds kind of off, giving them that dignity when you respond, because you never know. I have gone into a conversation thinking, oh, this is going to be just dumb. And then you, and then you get into it and you
Yeah.
go, oh my gosh, I never thought of that.
Well, or you get new information,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So like you, like I was referencing earlier about how I blame you. I didn't know the term neurodiversity until like a little over a year ago, and you're the one that told it to me, and then I'm a researcher. I want to know all the things, so I
Mhm.
started digging in, and wow, this is the
It,
thing that I've been living with my whole life, and I didn't know it had a name, much less that there was this big positive loving conversation
yeah,
going on about it. I never in
right.
a million years dreamed that that was even possible, much less it had I even fathomed that it would have happened in my lifetime, right? Never.
Right.
Couldn't have
Right.
couldn't have
And I
dreamed
love
in.
that. I think, when you told me that, that's been one of the greatest compliments of my life. because to realize that you showed somebody else that there's love for what they are and that it's exciting to be what they are.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. And that's I think that the best part about neurodiversity really becoming such a public topic is that more people are learning that you're not wrong, you're not bad, you're not a deficit. You're different in a positive way. And a lot of
Well,
those positive aspects can breed really great creativity and innovation and growth
yeah.
and all this. And so I think one of the things too to take away from this, when you have somebody that you love that has neurodiversity, help them find their tribe. Help them
Well,
find those other
not
humans out
only
there.
find their tribe and the people that are going to support them, but those people who support them are going to love them to a place to where they can love themselves. That for me was one of the biggest gifts that I received, probably starting about 12 years ago, is that I had fallen into this community of people that were all about spiritual for me, um, all about uh, your value as a person, and being connected and being your authentic self. And that was, but it was a hard sell for me. And I think
Right.
a big part of it was my neurodiversity and the fact that it was something I never thought I could talk about. I always hid it. So when you taught me the term neurodiversity, and I started digging in and doing the research, and it just kind of dawned on me that I had been living in this hiding and less than culture, trying to fit myself to the rest of the world, and that I didn't have to live that way. And that all these other people who are out there that are living that way, because I'm I'm not I'm not a snowflake. I'm not the only one. Um, so that they could have that too. It's like it opened a door for me.
Yeah.
And boy, what a gift. I mean, what a great gift. But that self-love thing, that grace for yourself, that is as important in loving someone with neurodiversity. It has to start with you.
Yes.
For me, that's so important in situations like time blindness is a big, big thing for me.
Mm.
And calendar appointments is a big, big thing for me.
Yeah.
And so I have come to realize, just through this last year and this whole experience, I've been on this journey of self-discovery as well. Because if I'm going to talk about it, then I need to know about it, and I need to know about how it shows up in me.
Right.
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 So I know now, after experimenting and some awareness, that I can look at my calendar for every appointment on my calendar the night before, and I can do
Yep.
it again the next morning. But some things don't translate from my computer calendar. They don't register.
Yeah.
I don't go, oh yeah, that's great. I have a Zoom meeting today with Dave, right?
Right.
Um, it it doesn't always happen that way. And it happened to me as recently as yesterday. And I have to tell you, I don't think anything will ever take away that feeling when you miss something,
Yeah.
because you know that the person on the other side, to some extent, even if it's just briefly, probably feels disrespected, like you
Right.
disrespect their time, like you don't value and appreciate the importance of having them made that time for you and you having made that time for them. And I did it as recently as yesterday. And the problem was I had it on my calendar. But what I've found is, just like we talked about the last time we met, I have to write everything down, take lots of notes, over prepare, and then I
Right.
may never look at the notes, right? But the act of
Right.
writing it down, it makes it stick here.
And
It
that's
helps me
important.
to recall it, right?
Yes.
So what I didn't do with that appointment yesterday, just like I didn't do the same thing, I had the exact same situation with our friend Dave Thompson about 3 months ago. We kept rescheduling, and then we finally got it set, and I was really excited for the appointment, and then he signed on to the appointment and I was MIA. So a couple hours after the appointment yesterday, I get this message going, I stayed on for 15 minutes, but I had to go. And I have to be able to own that and go back and say, you know what? It was on my calendar, but I didn't write it down in my planner, and I didn't set a reminder on the calendar.
And I love that you brought this up because the last thing I
Yeah.
want to talk about is it's not always easy to love somebody with neurodiversity. There can be some very difficult challenges. For instance, one of the things that I face while I'm hyper organized and never late or anything. I literally had a friend that thought I was dead because I was 3 minutes late. Legit, just jumped right to dead. Like not not like having tech issues, just straight to dead.
So used to you being on time for
Yeah, so
everything.
used to be on time that literally thought that the only option was that I was dead. Um, and while I have that part, I will do things like if I have a really bad manic cycle, I can overspend. And that can be really annoying for my husband. And I can be just a bullet train when I'm like that, which is great for work in one way, but then it's also disastrous in another way for some people because it doesn't work well with their way of processing or anything like that. They're like, whoa, slow down. And I'm like, no, go, 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 go. And so I'm hyper productive, but that can also be annoying. But the other thing that can happen is, so we've talked about the mental health aspects to neurodiversity. And when those are not properly cared for, even sometimes when they are, it doesn't always work out the way that we want. And I, so I'm going to give an example from my life of someone that I loved very, very much, grew up with my entire life, who had multiple diagnoses, including bipolar disorder, same as me. And she wouldn't get help and she wouldn't get treatment and she wouldn't do things to manage her condition. We all asked her to repeatedly. It wouldn't happen. She lost relationships because of this. She lost people that loved her very much that just said, okay, I can't do this anymore. This is too destructive. It's too dangerous. I can't. And eventually she starved and drank herself to death.
So
And
sad.
what I thought was interesting was that the first post that the person that handled that situation did about it was, if you're one of the people that took the step back, that made the choice to be healthier and safer in your life by removing her, this is not your fault. This is not because you did that. You tried. You loved her. You tried. And I thought that was so important because it's so easy. You see a lot of posts when that kind of thing happens about, oh, remember to go tell your loved ones that you love them. Remember, that doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't.
Still a good thing to do, but yeah,
it's still a good thing to do.
doesn't solve
Yeah, I don't
all
want
the
to take away from
problems.
that. It's a good thing to do, but it's not your responsibility to make that person healthier. You should support them. You should encourage them. You should help them get tools, help them find their tribe. You should speak to them in a way that gives them grace. We've covered those things. But it's also important to hear that someone else's well-being is not your responsibility. And parents, once your child is an adult, this is also true for you. And that's so hard to hear, but it's so true.
Well, that's why it has to, loving someone with neurodiversity, it has to start with you, the person, and having a lot of grace and forgiveness for yourself as well. Just like in that situation yesterday, I had to be willing to say, this was entirely on me. I take full responsibility, and I hate that I did it. And if you don't want to reschedule, I get it. But I have to do the same thing with my family. They, and it's interesting because I don't know that they are quite aware that, it's the running joke in the family that if they want me to be on time, they better tell me that things start an hour earlier than they actually do if I'm going to show up on time.
That I do that with.
Right. And I get that, and I'm okay with that because that's the reality of it. But what they don't understand is that cuts a little bit too, because what they don't see is all the effort that goes on behind the scenes to be on time. So how much genuine respect I have for their time and the value of whatever it is we're doing together, right?
And you have to, you
can't just beat yourself up about it all the
time.
And it's a grace thing. It's just like you said, grace. It's just like when recently when I did my neuropsych evaluation and they gave me my IQ results. And when they told me what my IQ results were, I realized that I had a story in my head that I was living by, and it was all those things that people had said to me over the years. And when they gave them to me, I couldn't speak. I couldn't not cry
Right.
because I think somewhere in my mind, I convinced myself that I was going to hit mid to low average.
Right.
And instead, I was high average to superior. And I
Right.
went, are you sure those are my
Wait,
kids?
wait a minute. Is that the same person?
But it made me realize that that's got to start with me. I have to
Yeah.
believe it's got to be about my internal dialogue, my internal
Yep.
self-love. It's got to
Yes.
start there.
And you do. And I love that you said that it has to be, and that's when you're a parent raising a neurodiverse child, it is so important to instill that sense of self-worth and self-strength that they can grow and have that confidence. For instance, I grew up, and my mom says part of this was just born into me, but I also think that she and my father instilled this in me, that I thought that if somebody didn't like how I acted or something like that, I was like, well, you're the problem, not me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't so much an ego thing. It was just, I know I'm great. So if you don't like me, well, whatever, okay, bye. And just kind of kept on going with it. Um, and even all those years of having people tell me, oh, you move too fast. Oh, you do this too much. Oh, you're too assertive. Oh, you're too this or that. It never occurred to me that I needed to change that from that standpoint. Now there were plenty of things I pivoted in other ways. Like if I hurt people's feelings or something like that was different. Um, but that never occurred to me. So instilling that sense of self-worth, and if you're the partner to somebody who's neurodiverse, who maybe didn't get that growing up for whatever reason, build them up, set them up
Yes.
to feel like they
And
have that sense of strength and self,
yes,
and
this
give.
is not every kid gets a trophy, by the way.
No,
But
no,
this
God,
is, let me tell you about all the things that are amazing about you.
yes.
Because I did it when I was a kid and I watched my kids do it when they were kids. And that was beat themselves up if they didn't do something well.
And who
And
cares? See, that's my
and
whole thing,
I
is who
could come
cares?
back and go, yeah, no, yep, we want to do better at this. And there are things we can do
But
to try to be better at this. And this was when, even being neurodivergent myself, I didn't necessarily recognize their own
right.
neurodivergence. One of them I did because he was exactly like me. You couldn't miss it. All right. But the other two, I didn't recognize that that's what was happening.
Right.
But the fact of the matter, it was this, they got the message, or at least I hope they did. I think they did, that they got the message that they are loved, have been loved since their first breath. They'll be loved till my last, and that
Right.
they are amazing exactly the way they
And
are
that's
and
the
for who
thing.
they are.
And who
Yeah.
cares? Like if you I have a niece and nephew, they're in the same household, and my nephew's great athletically, and he's super talented athletically, very smart with mathematics, science, that kind of thing. His little
Mhm.
sister, while very intelligent with math and science, she was the kid that instead of kicking the soccer ball would sit there and play with the tape on the gym floor. Like just
It sounds like me.
but she's a brilliant artist, just brilliant artist. And so she just has different skill sets than him. It's not that she's, and the same thing with him. Like just because she's the artist of the family doesn't mean that he's not just as valuable. They're both brilliant little children. And so it's so important to recognize that each individual has their own strengths and each individual has their own weaknesses, and that and we always want to grow,
Yeah.
right, and improve on our weaknesses, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make them less than. They just
Right.
have different needs. They just have different things that they need. And so as we wrap up, because we're way over time, which is fine, but that's
Which is
okay.
what we do.
um, we have to give ourselves grace, right? So remember to listen to the way that somebody communicates. Remember the story of the little girl who was trying to tell her family, this is what I need. And her vocabulary wasn't it to the level yet that it needed to be to communicate it clearly to them. So listen for those cues. Listen for those cues of, wait a minute, there might be something else here. Let me explore that. When somebody says something to you that maybe doesn't make sense or processes differently than you, remember, block that ego defense and respond with curiosity and say, tell me more about that,
Yeah.
and learn from them. That will help you with everything in your life, trust me, but
And that's
especially
huge.
it's
That
huge.
tell me more about that.
Tell
because
me
it
more about
really
that.
validates a person and their perspective and their
Yes.
opinion and all
Yes.
those things.
Yes.
It's so simple, but it's so powerful.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
celebrate a person for what excites them. Stop with
right.
the norms. I always tell people, I'm tired of high school graduations. Everybody graduates from high school. I'm tired of all this kind of stuff. Let's celebrate. And I know we celebrate marriage, and that's great. We celebrate babies, and that's great. But what about celebrating this person's first art show, or this person's
Yeah.
first scientific breakthrough, or this person's first corporate job, which is the exact
The
job that they've
thing,
always wanted?
those
Yeah,
things that show off their authentic
yes,
self.
they're who
Yes,
they are.
absolutely. Yep.
Celebrate the individual.
Yeah.
Break away from all this normal stuff and celebrate the individual human for what's unique about them. Give them grace, and remember too to give yourself grace. And when that other person is doing something that hurts you or causes you pain, talk to them about it. Show respect when you do it, but talk about it. And do remember too, because this is very important, that you are not responsible for another adult's well-being.
Yeah.
And with that, Kat, I want you to give our final words.
Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Happy Valentine's Day, Catherine McCord. You're awesome and amazing. And I'm so grateful that you had me on this morning. Appreciate
Back
it.
at you, Kat. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Same time, same place next week.
Bye.
Be full of love.